The cruel mountain man mocked the obese girl's weight. She still treats him good, and he never forgot it. The Texas sun blazed mercilessly at 7 in the morning, turning the rocky terrain into a shimmering expanse of heat and dust. Jacob the bear, Thornwood, emerged from the pine forest like a wounded animal, his massive frame swaying with each labored step. Blood seeped through the bear pelt draped across his shoulders, staining the fur a darker shade of brown. His face, weather-beaten and framed by a thick black beard, contorted with pain as he pressed a calloused hand against the gash in his side. He'd been tracking the Brennan gang for 3 days, poachers and river pirates who'd been stealing pelts from his trap lines and terrorizing settlers along the eastern Texas frontier. The confrontation had been brutal. Jacob had taken down 2 of them near the Trinity River, but Silas Brennan himself had gotten a knife between his ribs before fleeing with the rest of his men. Now, as he stumbled toward the settlement at Copper Creek, his vision blurred at the edges, and each breath felt like swallowing broken glass. The settlement consisted of perhaps 20 structures, log cabins, a general store, and a small church with a crooked steeple. At the eastern edge, near a cluster of cottonwood trees, smoke rose from a cooking fire. Jacob's keen eyes, even dimmed by blood loss, picked out a figure moving among the flames. Clara Whitmore knelt beside the fire, stirring a large iron pot filled with vegetable soup. At 23, she carried weight that the other women whispered about, rolls of softness that filled out her simple homespun dress and gave her round cheeks a perpetual flush. 3 orphan children sat nearby on stumps, watching her with expectant eyes. Their parents had died during the harsh winter when Choctaw raiders had swept through the region, and Clara had taken them in without hesitation, though she could barely feed herself. She heard the heavy footfalls and looked up, her hazel eyes widening at the sight of the mountain man lurching toward her. Everyone in Copper Creek knew Jacob Thornwood, and everyone kept their distance. He was a legend, a ghost story told to frightened children. They said he'd killed a grizzly bear with his bare hands, that he'd survived a Comanche arrow through the lung, that his heart had frozen solid years ago when his family died, leaving nothing but ice and rage. Clara stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sir, you're hurt." Jacob's lips curled into a sneer as he registered her appearance. Despite the agony lancing through his torso, his pride wouldn't let him show weakness. "Mind your own business, woman. Go back to feeding your face. Lord knows you've had enough practice at it." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd heard similar comments her entire life, from her stepmother, from boys in town, from strangers who felt entitled to comment on her body. But something about hearing them now from a man barely able to stand struck her as profoundly sad rather than hurtful. "You need medical attention," she said quietly, taking a step toward him. "I don't need nothing from you," Jacob spat. "Take care of yourself, fat as a sow. How could you help anyone when you can't even—" His words cut off as his legs buckled. He crashed to the ground like a felled tree, sending up a cloud of dust. The children gasped and scattered, but Clara rushed forward without hesitation. "Thomas," she called to the oldest boy, a gangly 12-year-old, "fetch water and clean rags. Mary, keep stirring that soup. Little William, stay back from the fire." Jacob's eyes fluttered open as he felt hands on his shoulders. Through the haze of pain, he saw Clara's face above him, not beautiful by conventional standards, but open and honest, with eyes that held no malice despite what he'd just said to her. "Don't," he rasped. "Leave me." "I'll do no such thing," Clara replied firmly. She was stronger than she looked, and she managed to prop him into a sitting position against a tree stump. "Thomas is bringing supplies. Try not to move." "Why?" Jacob's question came out as barely a whisper. "Why help me?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do." Thomas returned with a bucket of well water and an armful of cloth strips. Clara worked quickly, removing Jacob's blood-soaked bearskin coat and cutting away his shirt to reveal the wound. It was deep but clean, a knife thrust that had missed vital organs, but caused significant blood loss. As she cleaned the gash using techniques her father had taught her, combining herbal poultices with careful wound irrigation, Jakob watched her face. She worked with practiced efficiency, never flinching at the blood or the raw meat of the wound. Her hands, though soft and plump, moved with surprising deftness. "You've done this before," he observed, his voice rough. "My father was a physician in Philadelphia," Clara said, not looking up from her work. She crushed yarrow leaves and applied them to the wound to stop the bleeding, a technique she'd learned from a Delaware woman who'd traded herbs with her father. "Before he died, he taught me what he could, said healing was a gift that didn't care about the package it came in." Jakob winced as she pressed a clean cloth against the wound, applying pressure. "I'm sorry for what I said." "Are you?" Clara's tone wasn't accusatory, just curious. "Or are you sorry because you need my help now?" The question made Jakob pause. He'd spent so long being cruel, using his size and reputation to keep people away, that kindness felt like a foreign language. After his wife and infant daughter had died of fever 7 years ago during a particularly brutal winter, he'd retreated into the mountains, convinced that isolation was safer than connection. "I don't know," he finally admitted. Clara nodded, accepting his honesty. "That's a start, at least." She began wrapping clean strips of cloth around his torso, binding the wound. "You'll need to rest for several days. The cut wasn't deep enough to kill you, but you've lost a lot of blood. And if infection sets in—" "Can't stay here," Jakob protested weakly. "The Brennan gang, Silas won't let this go. He'll come back. Is probably miles away by now, and you're in no condition to chase them." Clara tied off the bandage with a firm knot. "There's a shed behind my cabin. It's not much, but it's dry and out of sight. You can recover there." "Why would you do that?" Jakob asked again, genuinely puzzled. "After what I said?" Clara sat back on her heels, studying him with those calm hazel eyes. "You want to know the truth? Because I know that nobody is born cruel. People become that way, piece by piece, when life hurts them enough. And I figure if someone can become cruel, maybe they can become kind again too. My father used to say that healing wasn't just about mending flesh. It was about mending spirits." The words struck Jakob like a lightning bolt. He'd never thought of his behavior that way, as something he'd chosen rather than something inevitable. For years he'd told himself he was just being realistic, that the frontier was harsh and only the strong survived. But looking at this soft-spoken woman who'd just bandaged the wounds of a man who'd insulted her, he wondered if maybe he'd been wrong about strength all along. "I'll help you to the shed," Clara said, standing and offering her hand. Jakob took it, surprised by the warmth and steadiness of her grip. Together, with Thomas supporting his other side, they made their way to the small wooden structure behind Clara's modest cabin. It smelled of hay and dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and a thin beam of sunlight cut through gaps in the wall planks. Clara settled him on a pile of blankets in the corner, then brought him water and a bowl of the soup she'd been making. "The children and I will check on you regularly. Rest now, and if you develop fever, I'll need to brew willow bark tea." As she turned to leave, Jakob called out, "Clara." She paused at the doorway. "That's your name, right? I heard someone say it once." "Yes." "Clara Whitmore." "Jacob Thornwood," he said, though they both knew she already knew his name. "And thank you." A small smile touched Clara's lips. "You're welcome, Jakob." Over the next 3 days, Clara tended to Jakob's wound with patient care. She changed his bandages twice daily using clean cloths boiled in water, brought him meals, and monitored him for signs of fever or infection. She applied poultices made from local plants, golden seal for infection prevention, comfrey for tissue repair, techniques that blended her father's medical training with indigenous knowledge. The children gradually overcame their fear of the mountain man, and little William even began leaving small gifts by Jakob's bedside: smooth river stones, an interesting pine cone, a bird's feather. Jacob found himself looking forward to Clara's visits. They began to talk, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about how her stepmother had made her feel worthless because of her weight, and how she'd come west after her father died, hoping to start fresh where nobody knew her. "But people are people everywhere," she said one evening as she rewrapped his wound. It was healing well, the edges beginning to knit together. "They see what they want to see. To some folks, I'll always be too fat to matter." "You matter to those children," Jacob pointed out, "and you're starting to matter to me." Clara's hands paused in their work. "Am I?" Jacob met her eyes. "You saved my life. And you're teaching me that maybe I don't have to be the bear anymore. Maybe I can be just Jacob again." "Who was Jacob before he was the bear?" Clara asked softly. Jacob leaned back against the wall, his eyes distant. "A husband. A father. For 3 beautiful months. A man who believed in goodness." His voice cracked. "And then fever took them both in the same week, and I couldn't be that person anymore. It hurt too much." "So you became someone who couldn't be hurt," Clara finished. "Someone hard and mean, who pushed everyone away first." "Yes." The admission felt like exhaling poison. "But you didn't let me push you away. Why?" Clara finished tying the bandage and sat back. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for your outsides instead of your insides. And I figured if the world had given me pain enough to understand cruelty, maybe I had enough to understand yours too." Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas bursting into the shed, his face pale. "Miss Clara, there are men in town asking about the bear. They say he killed their brothers, and they want revenge." Jacob sat up sharply, wincing at the pull on his wound. "The Brennans. How many?" "I counted 5, Thomas said, his voice trembling. "They've got guns and they're going cabin to cabin." Clara's face hardened with determination. "They won't find you here. Thomas, go back to the cabin with Mary and William. Lock the doors and don't answer to anyone but me." "Clara, no," Jacob protested. "If they find me here, they'll hurt you. I need to leave." "You can barely stand," she said firmly, "and I won't have violence on my property. I'll handle this." Before Jacob could argue, Clara strode out of the shed. He tried to rise, but his body betrayed him. The blood loss and 3 days of recovery hadn't been enough. Through a gap in the wall, he watched helplessly as Clara walked toward the main road where 5 rough-looking men on horseback had gathered. The leader was Silas Brennan himself, a wiry man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He dismounted as Clara approached, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Well, well," Silas drawled. "You're a hefty one, ain't you? Tell me, woman, you seen a big bastard called the Bear come through here? He murdered my brothers, and I aimed to return the favor." Clara stood her ground, though Jacob could see her hands trembling slightly. "I've seen no one matching that description. This is a peaceful settlement. We don't want trouble." Silas stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You're lying. I tracked his blood trail right to this area. He's here somewhere, and you're going to tell me where, or things are going to get real unpleasant for you and those brats you're looking after." "I told you," Clara began. Silas backhanded her across the face. Clara stumbled but didn't fall. Jacob felt rage explode in his chest, a fury so intense it momentarily overrode his pain. "Search every building," Silas ordered his men. "And if any of these settlers give you trouble, make an example of them." The gang members dismounted and began kicking in doors. Women screamed, children cried. The sound of breaking furniture and shattering glass filled the air as the outlaws ransacked cabin after cabin. Jacob gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. Every muscle screamed in protest, but he wouldn't let Clara suffer for his sake. He grabbed a rusted axe hanging on the shed wall and stumbled toward the door. Just as he emerged, one of Brennan's men spotted him. "He's here, in the shed!" All 5 outlaws converged on Jacob's position. He raised the axe, his vision swimming. knowing he was in no condition to fight but refusing to go down without trying to protect Clara and the settlement. "Stop!" Clara's voice rang out with unexpected authority. She stepped between Jakob and the advancing outlaws, her arms spread wide. "You want him? You'll have to go through me first." Silas laughed, a cruel sound. "Lady, you think I won't? Step aside or I'll put a bullet in you too." "Then do it," Clara said, her voice steady despite the red mark blooming on her cheek. "But I'm telling you right now, this man is under my protection. He's wounded and unarmed. If you kill him, you're not outlaws seeking justice. You're just murderers." "My brothers are dead because of him," Silas snarled. "Your brothers were stealing from honest people," Clara shot back. "They were terrorizing families, robbing trappers, and spreading fear. Mr. Thornwood was defending his livelihood in this settlement. If you want to blame someone for their deaths, blame the choices they made." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. Jakob watched in amazement as this woman, this kind, gentle woman who'd been mocked and dismissed her entire life, stood unflinching before armed outlaws. Then, from behind the outlaws, came another voice. "The lady's right, Brennan." Sheriff Augustus Dalton rode into view, accompanied by 6 armed deputies. The lawman was elderly but respected throughout the region, known for his fairness and his quick draw. "Your brothers were wanted men. Thornwood was within his rights to defend himself. Now, you and your boys can ride out of here peacefully, or we can settle this with lead. Your choice." Silas's face twisted with impotent rage. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and he knew it. "This ain't over," he spat, "not by a long shot." "Yes, it is," Sheriff Dalton said calmly, "because if I ever see you in this territory again, I'll hang you myself. Now ride." The Brennan gang mounted their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Jacob sagged against the shed doorframe, his wound seeping blood through the fresh bandages. Clara rushed to his side, supporting his weight. "You fool," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You could have died." "So could you," Jacob replied, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't let them hurt you." Sheriff Dalton dismounted and approached them. "Miss Whitmore, you've got more courage than most men I know. And Thornwood, seems you found yourself a guardian angel." "She's more than that," Jacob said, looking at Clara with an expression that made her breath catch. "Much more." The confrontation with the Brennan gang changed something fundamental in Copper Creek. Word spread quickly about how Clara had stood up to armed outlaws, and the townspeople who'd once whispered about her weight now spoke of her with respect. More importantly, it changed something in Jakob. As Clara nursed him back to full health over the following weeks, he began helping around her homestead, initially over her protests, but she eventually relented when she saw how much he needed to feel useful. He repaired the sagging porch steps, patched holes in the cabin roof, and chopped enough firewood to last through the winter. He also began teaching the children. Thomas learned to track animals by their spoor and broken twigs. Mary discovered she had a gift for identifying medicinal plants. And little William, who'd been mute with trauma since his parents' death, began to speak again. His first word in months was Jakob. One evening, about 6 weeks after the incident with the Brennans, Jakob and Clara sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed. The autumn air had turned crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. "I've been thinking," Jakob said slowly, "about staying, not just until I'm healed, but permanently." Clara's hand stilled on the mending in her lap. "What about your trap lines? Your life in the mountains?" "That wasn't a life. It was just existing." Jakob turned to face her. "Clara, these past weeks with you and the children, it's the first time since I lost my family that I've felt like I'm living instead of just surviving. You showed me that I don't have to be alone, that I don't have to be the bear." "Jacob," Clara's voice was thick with emotion. "I know I'm not much," he continued, "just a rough man with a violent past. But if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, help you with the homestead, be a father to those children who need one. And maybe, he reached for her hand, maybe see where this goes between us. Clara squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears. I'd like that. Very much. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands joined, watching the fire dance. Then Clara spoke again, her voice softer. I have to ask, though, are you sure? The townspeople are still wary of you. Some of them always will be. And being with me, Jakob, I've heard what they say, that I'm too fat for any man to want, that you must pity me, or that you're using me until something better comes along. Jakob's jaw tightened. Who said that? It doesn't matter who. It matters to me. His voice carried an edge of the old bear, the dangerous man he'd been. But then he softened, lifting her hand to his lips. Clara, listen to me. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Anyone who can't see that is a fool, and their opinion isn't worth a damn. You think I'm beautiful? Clara's question was vulnerable, almost childlike. I think you're magnificent, Jakob said with fierce sincerity. The day you bandaged my wounds while I lay there bleeding, while I just insulted you in the cruelest way possible, that's when I saw real beauty. Not in a reflection or a face, but in actions. In character. In a heart big enough to forgive a man who didn't deserve forgiveness. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. You deserved it. Everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. Then I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of that chance, Jakob promised, starting with this. He stood and disappeared into the shed, returning moments later with something wrapped in deerskin. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of smoothed wood about the size of his palm. Carved into it with painstaking detail was an image of a bear standing protectively over a smaller figure, a woman surrounded by children. I've been working on this for the past 2 weeks, Jakob said, suddenly shy. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something that showed how I see us, how I want us to be. Clara took the carving with trembling hands, tracing the figures with her fingers. It's perfect, she whispered. Jakob, it's perfect. That night marked an unofficial beginning. They didn't rush into anything. Clara had been hurt too many times by people who saw her as less than human, and Jakob needed to prove to himself that he could be the man she deserved. But they courted in the way of frontier people, through shared work, through laughter around the dinner table, through quiet moments stolen after the children slept. The first major test came in late October when a traveling preacher named Josiah Blackwood arrived in Copper Creek. He was a fire and brimstone type who immediately began holding revival meetings in the town square, drawing large crowds with his charismatic preaching. But Blackwood had a cruel streak. During one particularly zealous sermon, he pointed at Clara as she walked by with the children and declared, "Behold the sin of gluttony made flesh. This woman's body is evidence of her moral failure, a temple desecrated by indulgence." The crowd fell silent. Clara froze, her face draining of color. The children pressed close to her, frightened by the sudden attention. Before Jakob could react, Thomas, quiet, reserved Thomas, stepped forward. "You're wrong," the boy said, his voice shaking but determined. "Miss Clara took us in when we had nobody. She feeds us before herself. She works from dawn till dark, taking care of everyone but herself. If God judges her by her body instead of her heart, then I don't want nothing to do with your God." "Boy, you blaspheme," Blackwood began. "No." Jakob's voice cut through the square like a whip crack. He'd been at the general store and had heard the commotion. Now he strode forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "The boy speaks truth, and you speak poison." Blackwood drew himself up. "And who are you to challenge a man of God?" "I'm the man who was dying, and she saved me," Jakob said, coming to stand beside Clara. I'm the man who was cruel, and she showed me kindness. I'm the man who was lost, and she helped me find my way back to being human." He looked at Clara with unmistakable love. "And I'm the man who's going to ask her to marry me, because she's worth 100 of your so-called righteous folk," the crowd murmured. Some faces showed approval, others showed shock or disapproval. But Blackwood wasn't finished. "This woman is unfit for marriage," he thundered. "She is—" "Everything I could ever want," Jacob interrupted firmly. Then, in front of the entire town, he dropped to one knee before Clara. "Clara Whitmore, I know I'm doing this all backwards. I know I should court you proper and ask your permission private-like. But I want everyone here to witness this. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're the best thing that ever happened to me?" Clara's eyes welled with tears. Around them the crowd held its collective breath. Even Blackwood had fallen silent, perhaps recognizing he'd lost this battle. "Yes," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Jacob, I'll marry you." Jacob stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her in full view of everyone. Some people cheered, others muttered disapprovingly. But Jacob and Clara didn't care. They'd found each other, and that was all that mattered. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Well, now that's settled. Preacher Blackwood, I think your services are done here. We've got our own reverend, and he knows better than to insult the people he's supposed to serve." Blackwood sputtered, but ultimately had no choice but to pack his wagon and leave. As he departed, more and more townspeople came forward to congratulate the newly engaged couple. Not everyone was happy about it. Prejudice doesn't disappear overnight, but enough people had witnessed Clara's courage and Jacob's transformation that public opinion had shifted. That evening, as they sat together on Clara's porch with the children playing in the yard, Jacob said, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Don't be," Clara replied. "You stood up for me in front of everyone. Do you know how that felt? My whole life, people have judged me, mocked me, and I've just taken it. But you fought for me. You chose me publicly, proudly. That means everything." "I'll always fight for you," Jacob promised, "and for our family." "Our family," Clara repeated, savoring the words. She watched Thomas teaching William how to skip stones while Mary picked wildflowers. "They're good children. They deserve a real home." "They'll have one," Jacob assured her. "We'll make sure of it." They were married a month later in the small church with the crooked steeple. Clara wore a simple blue dress that she'd sewn herself, and Jacob wore clean buckskins and a shirt Clara had made him. Thomas, Mary, and William stood as witnesses, their faces glowing with joy. The ceremony was attended by most of the town, some out of genuine happiness for the couple, others out of curiosity. But when Reverend Patterson asked if anyone objected to the union, and silence greeted his question, Jacob felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend said with a warm smile. "Jacob, you may kiss your bride." And he did, tenderly and thoroughly, while the children cheered and the church bells rang. They moved into a new cabin that Jacob built with help from some of the townsmen, those who'd come to respect the former mountain man's transformation. It was larger than Clara's old place, with separate rooms for the children and a proper kitchen where Clara could practice her healing arts. The first winter as a married couple was hard but beautiful. Snow came early and heavy, and Jacob used his mountain skills to keep the family fed and warm. He taught Thomas advanced hunting techniques, and the boy proved to be a natural. Mary became Clara's apprentice in healing, learning to identify medicinal plants and prepare poultices and tinctures. One particularly bitter January night, Clara woke to find Jacob sitting by the window, staring out at the moonlit snow. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He turned to her, and in the dim light, she saw the tracks of tears on his face. "I was just thinking about Sarah and little Hannah, my first family." Clara rose and wrapped a blanket around both of them, settling against his side. "Tell me about them." And Jacob did. For the first time since their deaths, he spoke about his first wife's laugh, about his daughter's tiny fingers, about the dreams he'd had for their future. Clara listened without judgment, holding him as he finally grieved properly for what he'd lost. "I loved them so much," he whispered, "and I felt like loving you meant betraying them." "Love isn't finite," Clara said gently. "It doesn't run out. You can love them and love me too. They wouldn't want you to be alone forever, Jakob. They'd want you to be happy." "I think they'd like you," Jakob said, managing a watery smile. "Sarah would appreciate how you don't take any nonsense from me." "Someone has to keep you in line," Clara teased gently. That night marked another turning point. Jakob began to integrate his past with his present, understanding that he could honor his first family's memory while building a new life with Clara. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Clara discovered she was pregnant in March, and Jakob's reaction was a complex mixture of joy and terror. The memory of losing Sarah and Hannah haunted him. "What if something happens?" he asked Clara one night, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "What if I lose you too?" "Then you'll grieve," Clara said matter-of-factly. "But Jakob, we can't live our lives afraid of what might happen. We have to trust that we'll face whatever comes together." As Clara's pregnancy progressed, Jakob became almost comically overprotective. He insisted she rest constantly, refused to let her lift anything heavier than a teaspoon, and hovered like a nervous bear. Clara tolerated it with patient amusement, though she did have to remind him occasionally that pregnant women had been doing work for millennia and she wasn't made of glass. The children were excited about the coming baby. Mary helped Clara prepare baby clothes. Thomas built a beautiful cradle with Jacob's guidance, and William collected soft moss and feathers for the baby's bedding. In mid-September, Clara went into labor. Jacob sent Thomas racing for the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who delivered half the babies in Copper Creek. Then he paced outside the cabin like a caged animal, while Clara's laboring cries drifted through the windows. "First-time father?" Sheriff Dalton asked, having stopped by to check on them. "Second time," Jacob admitted. "My first wife. She and the baby died." Dalton's expression softened. "This isn't then, and Clara's strong. Have faith." Hours passed, the longest of Jacob's life. He prayed, something he hadn't done in years, making desperate bargains with God. Thomas, Mary, and William sat with him, offering silent support. Finally, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry split the air. Jacob's head snapped up, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Mrs. Henderson emerged, smiling broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. Thornwood. You have a healthy daughter, and your wife is tired but well." Jacob nearly collapsed with relief. He rushed inside to find Clara propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She looked up at him with infinite tenderness. "Jacob, meet your daughter." He approached carefully, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking from the blankets. She had Clara's nose and a shock of dark hair. Her eyes, a deep, indeterminate blue, blinked up at him solemnly. "She's perfect," Jacob breathed. "You're both perfect." "Would you like to hold her?" Clara asked. With shaking hands, Jacob took his daughter, cradling her against his chest. The baby made a small sound and nestled against him, and something in Jacob's heart that had been frozen for 7 years finally, completely thawed. "Hannah," he whispered, "in honor of my first daughter, if that's all right with you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect. Hannah Thornwood." The children crowded in to see their new sister, their faces alight with wonder. Thomas touched Hannah's tiny hand reverently. Mary declared she was the most beautiful baby ever born, and William, overcome with emotion, simply whispered, "Our family." "Yes," Jacob agreed, looking around at all of them, his wife, his children, his new daughter. "Our family." 2 years later, another son arrived. Samuel, with Clara's hazel eyes and a lusty cry that suggested he'd inherited Jacob's strength. Their family complete, Jacob and Clara settled into the rhythm of frontier life with deep contentment. Jacob had become a respected member of the Copper Creek community. He used his knowledge of the wilderness to guide hunting parties, always emphasizing conservation and respect for nature. He helped build new cabins for incoming settlers and trained young men in survival skills. Most importantly, he became known as a man who stood against cruelty in all its forms. When he saw anyone being mocked or diminished for their appearance, their background, their circumstances, he'd step in with quiet authority. "Judge people by their actions," he'd say, "not their outsides. I learned that lesson the hard way." Clara's reputation as a healer grew throughout the region. People traveled from miles away to seek her help, and she turned no one away regardless of their ability to pay. She trained Mary and eventually Hannah in the healing arts, passing down knowledge that combined medical science with natural remedies. On their 5th anniversary, the entire town gathered for a celebration. As Jacob and Clara danced together under the stars, he thought back to that scorching July morning when he'd stumbled into her camp, bleeding and bitter. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, reading his expression. "About how close I came to missing all this," Jacob admitted. "If you'd let me die that morning, or if you'd given up on me when I was cruel." "But I didn't," Clara interrupted gently. "And you didn't stay cruel. You chose to be better, Jacob. That was all you." "It was all you," he countered. "You showed me what real strength looks like. Not hardness or violence, but kindness in the face of cruelty. Compassion when it isn't deserved. Love when it isn't expected." Clara smiled. "Maybe it was both of us. Maybe we saved each other. Vro." "Maybe we did," Jacob agreed, pulling her closer. As they swayed to the music, surrounded by their children and neighbors, Jacob felt a peace he'd never imagined possible. He was no longer the bear, that lonely, angry man who'd pushed the world away. He was Jacob Thornwood, husband and father, healer in his own right, and living proof that people could change. And it had all started with one woman's simple act of kindness, a woman the world had judged unworthy, who'd proven herself more worthy than anyone. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the children were asleep, Jacob and Clara sat on their porch watching the stars. Jacob pulled out the leather pouch he always carried and withdrew the first bandage Clara had wrapped around his wound 5 years ago. He'd kept it all this time, a reminder of the moment his life had changed. "You kept that?" Clara asked, surprised. "Always," Jacob said. "It reminds me of the most important thing anyone ever taught me. That kindness has power. That one moment of compassion can change everything. That the strongest thing a person can do is choose love over hate." He tucked the bandage back into the pouch, then reached for Clara's hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing past the monster to the man underneath, for believing I could be better, for loving me when I didn't love myself." "Thank you for proving me right," Clara replied, squeezing his hand, "for becoming the man I always knew you could be, for giving me a family and a love I never thought I'd have." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been judged and found wanting by the world, who'd found worthiness in each other. The mountain man and the woman society had dismissed, had built something beautiful from broken pieces. A love story, yes, but more than that. A testament to the transformative power of kindness, the possibility of redemption, and the truth that everyone deserves a chance to be more than their worst moment. In the distance, a wolf howled, not Jacob's old companion, but one of his descendants. Jacob smiled, recognizing the call as a song of family, of belonging, of finding your pack after years of wandering alone. "I love you, Clara Thornwood," he murmured. "And I love you, Jacob Thornwood," she replied, "always and forever." The stars wheeled overhead, eternal witnesses to the quiet miracle of two broken people becoming whole together. And if anyone had been listening carefully, they might have heard, carried on the night wind, the sound of laughter and love, the sound of a family at peace, of redemption earned, of kindness rewarded. The mountain man had found his home at last, not in the wilderness he'd fled to, but in the heart of a woman brave enough to offer mercy to someone who didn't deserve it. And in doing so, she'd given him something more precious than his own life, the chance to become worthy of hers. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they'd met, Clara would smile and say, "Your grandfather was wounded, and I bandaged his injuries." And Jakob would add, his eyes twinkling, "But the truth is, we were both wounded, and we bandaged each other's hearts." It was a simple story, really, just a tale of cruelty met with kindness, of judgment overcome by love, of two people society had dismissed finding infinite value in each other. But it was their story, and it was true, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.